Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second webinar of 2017 of the Making More from Sheep summer webinar series. Tonight's webinar we're going to be looking at the topic joining Merino ewe lambs, the biology and the economics. Now there'll also be a little bit of follow-on information on joining ewe hoggets, Merino ewe hoggets as well, but the principle of tonight's presentation is on Merino ewe lambs. Our presenter is James Whale of Meridian Agriculture. And before we get started, I'm just going to run us through the GoToWebinar platform for those who are not acquainted to it. Just quickly, you can hear us, but I can actually hear you. The control panel that you can see here should be in the top right-hand side of your screen. You can use that red arrow on the left-hand side to collapse or reinstate the control panel so it's not covering up too much of the presentation. And that questions box is pretty integral to tonight's presentation. I might ask if a few people could slip some questions into the questions box so we know that it's working and you can hear me, and also that so we know that you know where the questions box is, because throughout the presentation we're going to be encouraging you to slip any questions into that questions box. What they do is they come up on my screen here and I log them in chronological order, and once we've got a good lot of questions in and we've come to the end of the webinar, I'll be able to chair that question time with the presenter, with James, and get them all answered before we head off this evening. So I see a few people there writing in. Thank you for that. Really good to see a few people on board. How are you going? I'm really well, thank you, and thank you for asking. Much appreciated. I hope there's no one out there suffering from any bushfires, and we're all got our joinings up and running for the for this 16 or the 17-18 production year. Okay, so with that, I might just present the Making More from Sheep program. Tonight's webinar comes from the module 10, which is labelled More Lambs. Now if you go into the Making More from Sheep website, I'm going to tempt fate here and do that for you with my computer. So if you type in, all you have to do is type in MFFS in your Google search button. You'll pull up the Making More from Sheep website. First hit at the top there, and then you can go straight onto the website and you'll see the modules there in a drop down box, and if you're interested in any of those modules I recommend that you go and have a look. In this instance we're looking at module 10, which is More Lambs, and if you go into that there'll be another page that will direct you to sources of information within the website, and I recommend that I have been through a lot of it, and there's some really good information there, and it's well worth, it's a really good tool for producers to research if they got topics that they're interested in. So let me just pull up my presentation again here. I'd like to introduce our presenter for tonight, James Whale. James is a farm business and livestock advisor with Meridian Agriculture in Hamilton, Victoria. James has completed his masters in the topic of tonight's discussion, and James works alongside small farming groups and individual producers to improve their farm business performance and to help assist with developing robust farming systems, livestock management systems and pasture management systems. So with that, I'd like to introduce James to the webinar. I'll just pull up James now. How are you going, James?
Very well, thanks, David.
That's the story. Welcome to the webinar, and with that I'm going to leave it up to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, David. And yeah, first, thanks for the invitation to present tonight. Okay, So yeah, so the topics I'd like to cover tonight, joining ewe lambs, as mentioned, the biology and the economics. And so some of this, a lot of this work will draw on a research masters that I was involved with that finished back in 2013, where we were specifically looking at joining Merinos to lamb at 1 year of age. Don't worry, we're going to cover other breeds too, for those who are interested. The reproductive success in Merino maidens, or your traditional hogget joining, we'll have a look at that, as well as tips to maximise pregnancy scanning rates in general. Okay, so first of all, here's a bit of data for you. Nationally, we know that about 20% of maternal ewe lambs are joined to lamb as lambs, and in Merinos it's around 5%, so not as popular, but I think that would certainly surprise some people that there are quite a few Merino ewe lambs being joined to lamb at 1 year of age. And that photo there, I guess that is up there really just to demonstrate what it's all about. Why we're looking to lamb 1 year earlier. Really, it's about getting extra weaners on the ground, and I guess it's become, it has been popular in recent times due to high value of sheep and weaners more generally, as well as some dry years that we've had, and people are looking to rebuild flock numbers. So I just wanted to have a little discussion about what's required for a ewe lamb, whether she be a Merino or a crossbred. What factors are necessary for them to actually conceive at this young age of 7 to 8 months to lamb at 1 year of age? So, well, we do know that live weight at joining is probably the key factor, and unless we can get some really good weights in ewe lambs at that age, we're not going to get very good conception. We also know on top of that weight gain prior to joining has an additional impact. So if we can get good weight gains of 100 grams to 200 grams a day in the weeks leading up to joining, we can get better results again. And also during the joining period, that weight gain is also important. We need to also consider the time of joining, the time of the year. So even in a Merino ewe lamb, the Merino breed, we describe as being non-seasonal. Well, in a ewe lamb, she certainly is seasonal, and until we start to get decreasing day length that we start seeing this time of year, it's very hard to actually get those ewe lambs to reach puberty, and we'll discuss that in a little bit more detail. Ram factors, there's ram factors to be aware of. Takes two to tango, and also genotype. I'll list genotype there, not just breed, but we know within breeds, and I guess the Merino is the obvious example, just huge variation in genotype within the Merino gene pool. So we need to be aware of that, and some of the information I'll be presenting tonight, I will stipulate that a lot of the works has been done with large Merino ewes, sort of 55 to 60 kilos standard reference weight. Okay, this graph here is really just to demonstrate that relationship between live weight at joining a ewe lamb, and the sort of pregnancy scanning rates we might expect. So we can see the Merino there, sort of 45 kilos, we might expect a scanning rate of 75%. Now this is not, this is some other work that's been done in industry with the 2 flocks that I was involved with. As part of this master's research, we were certainly getting much higher scanning rates at 45 kilo joining weight, up around that 100%. So not that far behind what we're seeing in some of the crossbred flocks. So the question I had as part of this research was, is it feasible to join a ewe lamb? Does it make sense? So a couple of things to consider. First of all, the biology. Can she actually do it? What sort of weaning rates can we expect to get out of joining a ewe at 7 to 8 months of age? And not just have a lamb, but can she produce a healthy weaner, something that's valuable at weaning age at 12 weeks of age? And I guess probably one of the biggest concerns around this, and talking to a lot of producers, some that have done it, some that have tried it, and some that have thought about it, is will there be a negative impact on the future performance of the ewe if we join her as a lamb? So it's obviously a key consideration, and that's something I spent a good deal of time looking at. And finally, the economics. Okay, well, even if we can do all this and there's no impact on future productivity, will it actually pay? And we know that there's considerable extra costs in running a system like this, so does it stack up financially? So just to consider what a merino is capable of. So this draws on some of the work that I was a part of, as well as other work that's been done, particularly in Australia with merino sheep. So we can get 8 out of 10 ewes to conceive at 7 to 8 months of age. That is possible. And produce a valuable weaner at around 16 months of age. And I think I pointed out just before, weaning rates of 75% is achievable, and that's to ewes joined at that age. It is possible for a merino ewe to rejoin successfully, again at that sort of 18 to 19 months, that traditional age of joining, and it is possible that there will be no negative impact on their reproductive rates in that year. What some of the research also tells us, and this is not just in merinos, but the ewes can actually have higher weaning rates the second year, not through higher scanning rates, but just the fact that those ewes have experienced motherhood before, they're more experienced, and we can see better lamb survival. And I guess this is all these things are possible, but perhaps the most limiting factor in achieving all these things is nutrition. So it's something I want to spend a little bit of time on this evening. So how do we do it? The additional nutritional requirements. Okay, well the first thing we know is they can be very costly. What we did was, what we now know from some of the work that we did, and it's not rocket science. How much more we have to spend to run these sort of systems are going to depend on many factors. Where you farm, what sort of pasture species you have, the stocking rate policies that you run, low, moderate or high, as well as the supplementary feed prices that at that time. And it's not only extra nutrition we need to think about before joining to get them to that sort of 45 kilos. It's really, we need a lot more nutrition because we need to support pregnancy and they're still growing, lactation, and making sure that they hit the weight that they need to be for rejoining, which is absolutely essential. So this is what I'd suggest. Basically, I'll put it up there in red. This is not something for everyone, and certainly if you can't be confident that you can meet the nutritional requirements for a ewe to lamb at 1 year of age, you shouldn't consider doing it. And so really from the day the rams go in, it's a 12-month commitment from that point forward as far as nutrition is concerned. And there's a huge amount of evidence out there that would clearly show that we can impact lifetime productivity and have negative impacts if we stunt the development of the ewe. So it's something we have to be really mindful of. So what is the target that we're suggesting? We're saying that at rejoining at 18 to 19 months of age, ewes need to be back to 90% of their mature body weight. So for a 60 kilo ewe, for example, we're looking at getting her to 54 kilos. I think the other key to all this is to really know, well, to meet these targets that we might be talking about, you know, what nutrition is actually required. What's, you know, yeah, and being confident about that. Okay, so here's a picture of some large frame Merino ewes. This picture is taken at rejoining at 18 to 19 months of age. All of these ewes were joined to lamb as lambs at 13 to 14 months of age. And there they are. They're in, I think most of you would agree, they're in exceptional condition, and we actually found, you know, extremely good reproductive rates in those ewes for their second joining. And you might notice one ewe there in the frame. You probably pick her on the right-hand side that has probably lambed and lost. Okay, so some ewe lamb joining targets. Okay, we're talking 45 plus kilos at joining. They really need to be that. Individual animals down to 40 kilos at a minimum. On the point of lambing, we're really wanting ewes to be 60 kilos or heavier. It might sound very heavy, but we've got to remember that a twin-bearing ewe should be carrying 14, you know, something like 15 kilos in placenta weight. So if she's not that heavy, a twin-bearing ewe, if she's not that heavy, really you've put on no body weight on the ewe herself since joining, and that's a concern. We need to make sure these animals are continuing to grow. So we said that 90% standard reference weight at rejoining, and probably just another point here, if you don't achieve that point of lambing target weight, it makes it extremely difficult to get up to your 90% of standard reference weight by rejoining. It just makes it so much harder, because from that point on, we're asking that ewe, once she's lambed, she's going to lactate for, you know, up to 3 months, and certainly it makes it really hard to keep a ewe growing over that period. So the earlier you try and get that weight on the ewe and get that body development, the easier you will find it. Okay, here's another picture of the same ewes that you saw before, but this is when this is at their first scanning. So these ewes are 10 months of age, and they're weighing in excess of 50 kilos. So they're right on target for that 60 plus kilos at on the point of lambing. So yeah, I've just put a slide in here about our traditional hogget mating at 18 and 19 months of age. What are our targets there? Well, generally my thoughts on this is industry-wide, we do see a lot of ewes that are just underweight when the rams go out at 18 to 19 months of age, and we shouldn't be surprised that we get the poor pregnancy scanning rates that sometimes are so common. So look, the target's the same. That I'm suggesting is 90% of standard reference weight at that age. We will see additional benefits through flushing, the use of lupins. A lot of work's been done on lucerne to show, increases in reproductive rate there. But I think, what we're probably across the industry, what we're not doing a really good job of is just getting the live weights up to scratch by the time the rams go out. And probably another one is just being really careful that ewes actually aren't losing weight during the joining period, because that's certainly not going to help things either. Okay, teasers, the time of year, and some ram factors. So some odds and ends here. So for ewe lambs, look, teasers work really well, and what we're trying to do with using teasers 15 days before the rams go in is we're trying to condense the period that ewes conceive. So it's really important for if we want to do a 4 or 5 week joining, we've got to use teasers, or otherwise we're just not going to get enough of them pregnant. And it's really important out the other end because it means we can wean earlier and we can give those ewes you know, the extra care and attention that they need to get them back to rejoining weights. Okay, so the time of year is really important for ewe lambs, as I said earlier. Really very difficult to get good conception before mid-February, and March and April we're going to get our best results. It's just a fact of nature. The other point here is use experienced rams. You know, that 2 years of age or older, really important because a ewe lamb's estrus, it's not very obvious. They're commonly referred to as being shy breeders, and it's can be very short. So the experienced rams are much better at detecting ewes that are on estrus and ready to take the ram. Okay, the economics of joining ewe lambs. So what we did basically in the work we did a lot of modelling using a program called GrassGrow, developed by CSIRO, and we used this to try and work out how much extra feeding would be required to run a 1-year-old lambing system compared to the traditional hogget lambing. Okay, so that's right. And I guess the other point there is that we wanted to look at that, simply feeding more to achieve the targets rather than changing stocking rate on the farm. That's what we were interested in. So keeping stocking rate, flock structure exactly the same, but just looking at how much extra feed is required to manage these ewes to do this. So we looked at barley. We just looked at feeding barley, and what we saw across the different systems that we tested was an increase of 24 to 116 kilos of barley per ewe managed to lamb as a 1-year-old, and that was an average annual increase over 40 years that we simulated using GrassGrow. And we looked at 3 different production locations. We looked at Wagga, we looked at Central Victoria, and we looked at Southwest Victoria at Hamilton. But so an incredible range. So depending on where you sit there, the increase depended on where you were based, the pasture species at your location, your stocking rate policies, highly stocked, moderately stocked, or lightly stocked. So just to put that in perspective, that sort of range that we're dealing with, 24 to 116 kilos at $200 a tonne for barley. The range was, you know, if you're on a particular farm, it might be $4.80 extra that you have to feed to do a 1-year-old lambing system per ewe, compared to up to 23. So if we're dealing with 1,000 ewe lambs, you know, it could be, depending on the way you farm and where you farm, we could be looking at something like on average, $23,000 per year for 1,000 ewes. That's the additional cost. It's also important to point out that over those 40 years that we simulated using this program, there's huge differences between individual years. So some years the additional cost was much greater. Okay, so this is, of course, this is what we're looking to do it for, these Merino ewe lambs. One of the trial flocks I was involved with in the Masters, these lambs here are in the picture are between 8 and 13 weeks of age, and certainly showed that through the management and the genotype that we were using, we could produce valuable weaners, additional weaners at that age. Okay, so I just quickly want to go into a little bit more about some of the economics, the economic results that we got from this research. So before you get too bamboozled by this graph, go ahead and have a look at it. I'll just try and give you a bit of background to it that'll hopefully help me to describe what we're looking at. So we wanted to look at the marginal rate of return of a one-year-old lambing system compared to just the conventional approach of lambing a ewe at 2 years of age. So marginal rate of return, it's a fantastic measure for comparing different ways we can spend money within the business. So whether we're looking at spending more money on better bulls or better rams, or using nitrogen fertilizers on pasture at extra cost for extra production, it doesn't really matter what. If we're looking at spending more money in the business, it's a great way to measure, well, what do we get back from that additional expenditure. So that's the reason why we chose this measure. Okay, you'll see on the graph it's a loosened pasture up the top. Now this is a loosened pasture at Wagga, and the SR3 just means we're looking at a system where we're running 3 ewes per hectare. So what's that, 5 DSC per hectare, a very conservative or low stocking rate. Okay, the graph also assumes that we're going to achieve a 70% weaning rate, and that's to ewes joined, and the extra lambs that we produce are valued at $60 a head. Okay, so down the bottom of the graph, the bottom axis, it's marginal rate of return, MRR, and 100% marginal rate of return it's quite simple. It's for every dollar invested, we get $2 back. Okay, we get the dollar back that we invested, and we get an extra dollar. So we're getting 2 for 1. We can get negative marginal rates of return. So basically that just means we didn't get all the money back that we invested. Okay, so you'll see 3 curves there, and it is a bit complicated. I'm sorry, but hopefully I can explain it. They're for different supplementary feed prices. That's all we're looking at. So on each of those curves, there's 40 dots representing the 40 different years that we simulated at Wagga. And on the other axis that says cumulative probability, that's nothing fancy at all. All we're doing there is we're just spreading out all the numbers or all those individual years so we can actually get a clearer picture of what the marginal rate of return was. So we're just effectively spreading out those dots so we can see them. So what does this tell us? This graph here is telling us that at a low stocking rate on loosened pastures at Wagga, the marginal rates of return didn't matter what the supplementary feed price we looked at, we were getting positive rates of return. So, and you can see there's a lot of dots there to the right hand side of 100%, which is saying we're getting more than $2 back for every additional dollar we're spending on barley in this case. Okay, now I want you to we're going to take that graph, we're going to go to the next slide. Now the graph that we were just looking at is in the top left-hand corner, and what I've introduced here is some other graphs because what we wanted to do in the research is try and understand some other variables. So you'll see the 2 graphs on the bottom. They're looking now at a stocking rate of 6 ewes per hectare, so basically 10 DSC per hectare. We did look at higher stocking rates as well. And the 2 graphs on the right-hand side are for what we've called a typical pasture there, but it's a flareous clover-based, subclover-based pasture at Wagga. Okay, and so this just basically shows us some of the differences that we were seeing across the systems. Again, at a weaning rate of 70% and valuing the lambs at $60 per head as a weaner, you can see that we're not really seeing, well, we're seeing mostly positive marginal rates of return. Okay, so we're getting money back on the investment. Okay, now another way to display this is a final graph I want to show on the economics. Now we want to consider different lamb values per head, and so you can see those on the right hand side. And what we were wanting to know is, based on the information on the previous slide, is what was the probability then of exceeding a certain marginal rate of return threshold. And we set that at 50%. So basically we were saying, look, it's hard to see why someone would be interested in this unless they were getting $1.50 back for every dollar spent. So, or getting $15,000 back for every $10,000 they might be spending in additional supplement. Okay, so this here shows those same variables we looked at before, so 2 stocking rates and a lucerne as well as a Phalaris pasture. And we can get to a better sense now of how important lamb value is and how important supplementary feed cost is to achieving those thresholds. So we can see there pretty clearly that $150 per tonne as fed for barley, basically in all those systems we are getting returns of greater than 50% marginal rate of return. So it looks really good at $250 per tonne. The way we value that additional weaner is becoming more important, but certainly the higher values, $60 and $80, it's looking really positive, up around 90% or better probability of achieving that 50%. And then at $350 a tonne as fed, well, some of them start to drop out, and you know, we're looking, in some of those, less than 50% probability of actually achieving that threshold. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an example of what we looked at, and certainly, yeah, for your own circumstances, if you want to find out more, I can provide extra information. So these were some, yeah, these are some ewe lambs that have lambed at 13 to 14 months of age prior to marking. So some take-homes. You know, look, in merino ewe lambs, it can be done successfully and profitably. How much more profit we're talking about? Well, it really depends, and that's what this work was about. It really depends on where you farm and how you farm. I think it's really important, we just can't underestimate the increase in nutritional requirements if we choose to join a ewe lamb. They're really large and it's not for everyone. And probably the key point is, you know, attention to detail. It's really important, and we certainly don't want to, you know, ruin the lifetime productivity of the ewe. And probably when we're looking back at hogget mating, if that's what you're doing, that's what, you know, 95% of merino producers are doing, and that's fine. It makes sense to do that. I think it's, you know, no excuses anymore for poor scanning rates. You know, we've just got to get ewes up to body weight for joining, and nutrition is the key to that. Okay, David, that's me.
Awesome, thanks James, much appreciated. We'll just give James there a break, let him take a breather after giving us a very informative and succinct webinar. Now I didn't envy James's role tonight, because James has done a lot of work in this area and been able to condense down all that he has researched and all the variables that he's put into the modelling, and trying to understand what the key messages are for the farmers. It's hard to do that justice in a 30 or 25-minute webinar, but he's done very well at getting the key messages across tonight. So once again, James, he's got his contact details up there. You'll be able to be in touch with him personally if you wish at any time, or you're welcome to be in touch with us, Home Sackett. We're the New South Wales State Coordinators of the Making More from Sheep program. Now, there's a few questions coming through. Just before we go into those questions, I'm just going to give next week's webinar a quick plug. It's going to be run by Associate Professor Bruce Allworth. He's done a few webinars for us thus far, and he's a great source of knowledge, and not everyone has access to Bruce these days because he runs his own operation, and these webinars are really a great way to bring Bruce to centre stage and let him fill us in with all that he's learnt and researched over his many years in livestock production systems. So the webinar is going to be on ewe health and reproduction, with a focus on diseases and non-nutritional factors. So we're going to move away from the stereotypical, you know, how much you can feed, and what are the results going to be. And we're going to be looking at trace elements and key diseases affecting the reproductive capacity of the ewes. So that's going to be next week on Wednesday at 8 p.m. and then we're going to have a break for a week, and then after that we're going to be back on board the following Wednesday with Phil Graham to talk about investment in the pasture this year, but we'll be able to give you guys more information on that as we progress. So James, you'll be happy to know there's a good lot of questions coming through here, and if you're ready to go, we might get stuck into them.
Yeah, David.
So James, I'm just going to read them out. If you want me to read them out again or sort of rephrase them, just let me know. No dramas there. A quick question here. Would you see issues with using brassica for supplement feed, maybe swede and termites? And in this particular chap's instance, he's going to use iodine bolus, simultaneously, I suspect.
An iodine bolus. Yeah, look, I don't know specifically about an iodine bolus and what that might be for. But that's okay. But generally, a lot of these green summer crops, from my understanding, and there's some work that's been done at Hamilton on this in the last few years, generally can have really positive impacts on scanning rates, and perhaps, and particularly in the lead up to putting the rams out. I think the recommendations around it are very similar as for what we see with lucerne, is that if it's really lush feed, there can be some problems with the hormone balance in the ewe, but that's if they're on that feed, continue to be on that feed during the joining period when the rams are with them. So my understanding is that's about the embryo settling and planting itself in the uterus wall. That's why the hormone imbalance at that time can be an issue. But certainly my understanding is those sort of feeds prior to joining can put them on a rising plane of nutrition, high protein, high energy, and we can actually get more ewes to reach puberty and get more multiple ovulations as well.
Great, thanks James. Thank you. James, another question from Adam. With your marginal rate of return calculations, how many kilograms of barley were you feeding per head?
Yeah, so, well, good question. So, it did depend a lot on where we were, on the variables that we were using. So there was 3 production locations, 2 different pasture types at each location, as well as your stocking rate differences that we looked at, 3 different stocking rates at each place, but they range between the additional barley fed was on average anywhere between 24 and 116 kilos per head more if you chose to manage a ewe to lamb at 1 year of age than what it would have been, yeah. So it's additional feed on top of what you would have fed if you were just running that ewe to join her for your traditional hogget mating.
Yeah, and that amount of feed, James, was variable based on the modelled season within the grass grow program.
Yeah, so look, between individual years, the variation was even larger than that. Okay, so that was the average for that system over 40 years.
Yeah.
Well, it ranged between whatever it was, 24 kilos and 116 kilos per head more supplement.
Yes. Okay. Great. Thank you. A quick question here from Beth. How many of your sites achieved a weaning rate of 70%?
Well, they both did. We had 2 sites, and both weaned between 70 and 75%. In fact, it was surprising. Different genotypes, extremely similar pregnancy scanning rates, lamb survival, and weaning rates on in those 2 flocks.
Okay, great. Thanks, James. James, question here from Brad. How small do lambing groups need to be when lambing at 12 months?
Oh, well, good question. I wish I knew the answer. I think we'd probably say as small as possible. The smaller the better. If we can be getting mob sizes down to 50 or 100, better again. And perhaps, you know, and really thinking about, well, the twin bearing ewe lambs, well, they're the ones that really do need to be in small mobs. So, you know, perhaps singles we could get up to, you know, 200 ewes in a mob, but for twins, I think it'd be best to try and get them down to 50.
Okay, great. Thanks, James. James, a question from Grant here. When you said you kept the stocking rates constant between the normal lambing at 2 years of age group and lambing at 1 year of age, did you keep the actual DSEs constant or the number of ewes per hectare constant?
Look, great question, and it's one that we debated before going ahead with the modelling. What we chose to do was just keep the ewe numbers the same. So the DSE ratings are different, but we were pretty comfortable with that because we were prepared to meet those extra DSE requirements with supplement. And that program, Grassgrow, is very good at, well, you know, it's a dynamic model where it's those sort of differences. It makes those adjustments in the pasture growth as well as the pasture consumption predictions. So we felt that it could handle those sort of differences. But yeah, it's a really good point. But we just thought back to, if someone's considering doing this, they're probably not likely to change their stocking rate. They're going to say, all right, well, I'm going to feed them more to achieve it.
Yeah, great. All right, thank you, James. James, I'll just give you a break there for a second. I've got a question more for me here from Pauline. Are the webinars recorded? Yes, they are recorded, Pauline, and we will make them available to all registered participants. I'm working with MLA at the moment and getting them hosted on the Making More from Sheep website, or it could be the MLA website. I'm not sure yet which way we'll go, but on that point, I just do want to encourage everyone that's here tonight to keep coming to the live webinars because you know, the funding is coming out of the, you know, your levies and AWI's input as well, MLA and AWI levies. Now, if everyone sort of opted to watch the recordings, then inevitably we'd have no one at the live event and we'd have to stop doing the webinars. So I do encourage people to come along to the live webinar and take advantage of this Q&A session, and yeah, keep the participation at a level where we can justify continuing the webinar series. Now look, another question here from Beth. Where can I sell a wiener for $60? She wants to sign up. Probably not, no answer needed there, or a comment.
No, look, that is a good point, and I did mean to mention this. So really, what we were looking at weaner age, putting a value on the additional weaners, but we weren't necessarily saying we're going to sell them. So that's why we wanted to consider a range between $40 and $80 a head. We thought that would, for most people, that would cover the bases. But it's thinking about, for a lot of people, they won't be sold, and it's thinking about what those weaners end up being worth in your own business. Yeah, so look, how long's a piece of string? It takes an individual business to go and work out probably what values they'd place on additional weaners, and I'd like to think that somewhere between $40 and $80 would probably cover it.
Great. Okay, thank you, James. Question here from Brad again. Do you give scanned empty ewes another chance? Now, I suspect that's ewe lambs, Brad, if I'm just reading between the lines there. So.
Yeah, okay. Well, yeah, good question. I think it depends on your own situation. I mean, look, as ewe lambs, depending on how many of them you're getting pregnant, I think it's probably pretty harsh to flick them out if they don't. One of the reasons why it's hard to get more than sort of 8 out of 10 to scan pregnant is that their embryo survival is not as good as an adult ewe. So they actually may have had their egg fertilised, but they've just had some problems planting in the uterus. So there's no reason to think that those ewes won't be productive in the future.
Okay, thanks, James. Is there any benefit by mixing the ewe lambs in with older ewes at mating on conception rates in the ewe lambs?
Good question. I don't know the answer. I haven't seen any work done on it, but I would be concerned that the mature rams or the experienced rams that you've got out there will be careful what I say this, but I'd say that they won't be working as hard to detect the ewe lambs that might be on estrus, because the mature ewes will show display estrus it'll be much more obvious to them. Whereas if you just got the ewe lambs, the rams have to work harder to work out which ewes are on estrus.
Great, right. Thanks, James. James asks, what is the recommended supplementary feeding regime post-mating up until lambing for the 40 kilogram plus Merino ewe lambs?
Yeah, so okay, so I'm not sure if this means that if you've got some lighter ewes that you've joined that didn't make the 45 kilos, not sure. Look, I mean, for those that have done, lifetime ewe, something like lifetime ewe, it's simply a matter of getting out, assessing your pastures and working out what sort of nutrition they're getting from those pastures. And yeah, basically you're wanting those ewes to continue growing. So we've got, to get from 40 kilos to 60 kilos, you've got 150 days to do it, just working it back, what growth rates required. And if the pastures aren't going to do it by themselves, you need to use something like grass feed perhaps to work out how much supplement is necessary to do it. And yeah, probably the reason we use barley is because it is quite a popular feed, and it does meet a lot of the requirements that we'd be looking for.
Thanks, James. James, a good question from Jeff here. How do you join at 12 months when you join everything else in the autumn and get those weaners back into the joining cycle in the autumn? Now, there may be a misinterpretation. I'm not sure. How do you join at 12 months? So, it could be how do you wean them at 12 months?
Yeah, maybe it is. So look, the work we were looking at was joining at 7 or 8 months. That's right, and so they're going to be joined slightly later than a month or up to 2 months later than your adult ewes. That's what we were assuming. So yeah, a winter spring lambing flock. So how do you do it? So it's simply, early weaning is really important, and as long as those ewes are still heavy enough, they really don't need a lot of time post weaning to be ready to join again. So if it's 6 or 8 weeks between weaning and rejoining, that's if they're heavy enough, there shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, thanks, James. James Clayton asks you, what are your thoughts on lupin flushing before and during mating with ewe lambs? Can there be too much protein, as this can be the case with adult ewes?
Yeah, look, we don't really know, but I think, because I haven't seen the work done on ewe lambs specifically, but I think, again, you just want to be careful, just like you've suggested with the adult ewes, we could well have the same problem, that basically the nutrition is just too good, too much protein, too much energy, and it throws out the hormone balance for the embryo for implantation in the uterus. So Yep, so basically I think the standard recommendation is to stop that sort of high level of flushing feeding 2 to 3 days after the rams have gone in.
Okay, thanks James. James, I'll just give you a quick break there for a second. I'm just going to give make everyone aware of the post-webinar survey that should pop up on your screen once you've closed the webinar platform, or I've shut the webinar down. Now that survey is very important to us. We take that data and organise it for MLA and AWI to look over, and they use that data to help gauge the effectiveness of tonight's webinar, and also take your ideas to build on, extension programs into the future. So really important that you put your thoughts down on paper. What you think we've done well, what you think we can do better, and we'll take that on board and make sure we making sure that we get the best return on the spend of your levies. Now, a few more questions coming in here, James. You're keeping everyone interested, which is really good. A quick question here from Peter. Will rams joined at 1% to adult ewes over a 5-week joining period be able to handle a 5-week joining at 3 to 4% for the 8-month-old ewe lambs?
Yeah. So can you just repeat the question again?
Yeah, no drums at all. So Peter's joining his rams at 1% to his adult ewes, over a 5-week joining period, and he wants to know, will those same rams be able to handle a 5-week joining over at 3 to 4% for his 8-month-old ewe lambs?
Yeah, look, I think the answer is there shouldn't be a problem at all, provided the rams are in reasonable condition once they've come out of the mature ewe joining. I have seen some work done on it, certainly coming out of New Zealand, and they look to they're looking to do something very similar for their ewe lamb joinings. They use the same rams that they use for the adult ewes, and then use them again a few weeks later.
Yeah, right.
Or straight away. So look, don't think it's an issue at all.
Okay, thanks James. Thank you. James, question from Graham. What is the average barley feeding rate on Phalaris clover at the high rainfall location similar to Hamilton and Victoria?
What is the high rate? Well, it's interesting. So
now what is the question?
Answer that question, but the high rate probably in the modelling.
Sorry, James. I think hang on. I think we got it. What is the average barley feeding rate on the Phalaris clover at the high rainfall zone, similar to Hamilton?
Yeah. Okay. I understand the question, but to be able to answer that properly, I'd have to go and have a look, delve into some of the outputs that we had from the modelling to give you a decent answer on that.
Yeah, no dramas.
And probably one of the points is that it did depend so much on the year. So we simulated 40 years, historic years at each location. Sometimes the year we're doing a lot of feeding, and then the very next year, same time of year, we might not be doing any feeding at all. So it's really, really variable.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I think that's something we're going to take note of, guys. James is obviously got his contact details up there, and there'll be there's a lot of understanding to be had around that modelling that he's done as part of his research project, and and work afterwards in a consultancy capacity. So be in touch with him if we want to flesh out the finer detail. A great resource, and this is what we're all about, is getting the people who've done the work in front of the producers to build to help build plans, for farm business systems. Okay.
Yeah. One thing I might just add one thing to that might be helpful, is that to get 45 kilos at 7 to 8 months of age, so basically from a weaner, I think if you work it out, a typical weaning weight, they need to be doing something like 160 grams a day from that point until you put the rams out with them. Now, yeah, so you do need a fair bit of, in a lot of cases you need a fair bit of barley to do that, and in some cases in this modelling they would have been being fed as much as they would eat, basically. So, and GrassGrow handles that. It's got some really good models in there to sort of know what are the limits to a lamb of that size, what can it actually eat.
Okay, thanks, James. James, we've had another question, a question here from Terry. What are your thoughts on ideal mob size at mating time?
Ewe lambs, haven't seen any research done on it. I think it's, as we talk about with adult ewes, things like water points are probably an issue, or undulating country might be an issue with how big we can go for mob size. But yeah, look, I can't really answer, but I think joining, I've seen plenty of work done where 500 or more ewe lambs are joined in the same mob, and we haven't detected any issues with that.
Yeah, rightio. Thanks, James. James, question here from Adam. He's asked a few tonight, which is really good. Is the lambing weaning rate of 70% based on ewes joined or ewes scanned and lamb?
Yeah, it's based on ewes joined. So I was talking about weaning percentages based on the number of ewes joined.
No dramas. Okay, thank you. Another question from Clayton. Do you give ewe lambs who lambed and lost a second chance?
Look, I would. I generally would. It depends, I suppose, on what your objectives are. I mean, I guess there are flocks out there that, if, particularly probably, crossbred flocks, if they're really trying to improve fertility or increase fecundity in that flock or that genetic base, well, maybe they will be getting rid of those lambs. And I guess it becomes down to a thing if you've got excess sheep on farm, well, maybe that's something you're going to consider doing. Yeah, hard one to answer.
Yeah, no
Depends
dramas.
on the situation.
No dramas there, James. A few more questions here for you, James. Ben's asked one here, James. Using experienced rams for ewe lamb breeding, do you run the risk of dystocia with an increased weight gain, or do we use rams with lower muscle ASVVs just for the ewe lamb breeding?
Oh, yeah, well, good question. I mean, I think we need to be careful of the birth weights. If we do have birth weight indexes on the rams that we're using, that would be a real key one to consider. I'm not sure if you're talking about Merinos specifically or other breeds of sheep, but obviously, well, it's quite common for some people to use a different type of breed that's renowned for easy lambing as the ram that will go over ewe lambs as well.
Great, thanks, James. James, a question here from Megan. What is the ideal fat score at joining for ewe lambs?
Fat score, okay. Well, I'm not that familiar with fat score. I'm from Victoria. I talk about condition score. But so, what's the ideal? So was the question for joining a ewe lamb?
Yes, joining ewe lambs.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that there is one. I mean, from a lot of the work, it would suggest, look, the fatter the better, but really it comes down to the live weight. I think that's probably, the easiest indicator. I tend to use condition scores more for mature animals once they're fully developed. Whereas, I think live weight's probably a better indicator for body development for a juvenile or a young ewe that's not fully developed.
Yeah, for sure. No, okay. Now, James, we've got so Grant previously asked about the you know, the stocking rate differences between the lambing ewe lambs and the Holgate lambs, and he's made the comment here that maybe the increase in profit has actually come as from an increase in stocking rate.
Well, the only thing we I'll take the comment, but the only increase in income that we looked at comparing the two systems was simply their weaning, or the additional lambs from the 1-year-old lambing system. So we were making the assumption that there was no difference in wool productivity, which we know that there probably is, so we didn't actually look to try and factor that in. But yeah, if we did, there's probably potentially additional economic advantages for 1-year-old lambing systems with extra wool growth due to better nutrition throughout that period.
Right, well, thanks, James. James, quick question here. Do you have any data on joining ewe lambs to ram lambs?
Yeah, don't have any data. Well, I don't have any data on it, but I have seen some work done on it, some research done on it, and yeah, the indication certainly is that ram lambs aren't as good at detecting estrus in ewe lambs.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Good. From our Western Australian cohort, the comment is here: in Western Australia, our season can be cut short in September. For July lambing, are we wasting our time joining at the same time, or I suggest joining our ewe lambs at the same time as our main flock?
Yeah, well, July lambing, if you're joining ewe lambs, that's a February joining, I presume, start of February. I think you could definitely see some benefits in delaying joining of the ewe lambs. Yeah, it's probably just a little bit early. If you were to push that back a month, I would be highly surprised if you didn't see much higher reproductive rate.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay.
Pregnancy scanning rate, I should say.
Yep. Okay. Economics from Terry. If we have more ewe lambs lambing with lower lambing percentages, and we are replacing older ewes who should have had higher lambing percentages, what would that mean? Would that mean we end up with less lambs at the end of the day?
Yeah, look, a great question, and it's probably sums up why we chose to do the modelling the way we did. Was we didn't want to change flock structure. We didn't think that made sense to join ewe lambs and then run less adult ewes. We thought the only way that it would actually stack up economically is if you're prepared to run the same number of sheep and just choose to feed them more to achieve those targets. So that's the way we looked at it.
Yeah.
And hopefully that sort of answers your question. I agree with you. I mean, I think if you're getting rid of adult ewes to join ewe lambs, I can't see how it would make economic sense.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good thought there. Thanks, James, and that's a good question. Very good question from Terry. Question here from Ian for you, James, is there any effect from grazing ewes on lucerne at joining? So I think that's in the same vein as our previous question, maybe about lupins.
Well, that could be a loaded question from someone that knows possibly a lot more about it than me. But look, I mean, my understanding is a lot of the work shows that lucerne can have a really good impact on joining rates, but generally the recommendation is, particularly if it's lush lucerne and they're doing really well on it, it's best to take those ewes off lucerne once you put the rams out, because we can get some reabsorption of embryos.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Ian, there's some good information up on the GRAS feed. The Evergrades website about joining on Lucerne. Susan Robertson from the Charles Sturt University has done a fair bit of research in that space, and a summary of some of her work is available. I think it's on the Evergrades website, but if you ever needed to talk to Susan Robertson about that, I'm sure she'd be happy to field a few questions, and she's at Charles Sturt University. Another question here for you, James, from Cameron. Was the economics of wool grown on a merino lamb that was mated versus not mated at all considered?
Good question. Yeah, we did. We did have a look at it, and there's no doubt. Yeah, so there's a couple of things. We would probably the biggest difference we saw in the modelling, and GrassGrow does a pretty good job of this too, is we were growing more wool in the systems where we're joining ewes as lambs. There'd probably be a question over the quality of the wool. Things like tensile strength could be an issue. In the end, we left it out. We thought it was getting a little bit overcomplicated. I could say that, from looking at that work, I'd say it's highly likely that you're going to produce more wool if you run a one-year-old lambing system where you're running them at higher live weight profiles. So there's potentially additional benefit.
Okay, thanks, James. Question from Simon. How does this work translate for first cross or crossbred ewe lambs?
Well, yeah. Well, the economic work that I put up there, it really doesn't matter if it's a merino or a crossbred, because it depends how you value an additional lamb. Certainly in the modelling we did use a merino sheep, so looking at how much they eat, etc., and their interactions with the pasture, but I don't expect them to be very different for a crossbred animal. So I think you could say, well, the economics that I've presented tonight are very relevant for a crossbred sheep as well.
Okay, well, thanks, James. James, I'm going to show my naivety around the ASBVs, but there's a question here from Ian as well. Is the YNLW EBV important in maternals? Now that's, you might be able to interpret that as good as I can, a yearling.
Oh, a number of lambs wean, probably. Yes. Is it? YNLW?
It's just
number of lambs wean. So what's the, I might not be able to help here, but what's the question?
Is that EBV important in maternals?
Number of lambs wean. Yeah, well, it certainly is, from my understanding, but I'm probably not probably not the best person to talk about it.
Yeah, no dramas. Appreciate that, and no worries at all. So, James, we've almost out of questions here. There's a few people starting to duck off there. I see now. Don't forget that survey at the end of the webinar. Just take 2 seconds to fill that out for us. Interestingly, we always go straight to the comment section and read any comments that you put down there for us. That's where we get the best feedback, so save your best recommendations for that point and just jot them down, and yeah, we take that on board. Now, quick question here for you, James, before we wrap up. It's from Joe. And Joe hasn't asked the question yet, but James, do you recommend vaccinating new lambs for Campylobacter?
What a great question, and apologies for not including it in the presentation. Yeah, look, I think it's really important if you're going to go to the trouble of joining ewe lambs. You want to try and protect yourself against Campylobacter. So yeah, using a Campyvax vaccine prior to joining. There's two vaccinations required. Really important, and certainly it's becoming a lot more popular even for hogget matings these days as well. So It's something I'd definitely have a conversation with about with your vet.
Okay, well, thank you for that, James. Question here from Clayton. Now, this is going to this is referring to the productive potential of ewe lambs after they've lambs first as a ewe lamb. How many more ewe lamb? How many more lambs over the next 4 to 5 years would you expect out of a ewe lamb that is lambed as compared to one that hasn't?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question, and probably the thing that surprised me when we went ahead and did this research was just how much work's been done on exactly that question, internationally, and obviously not all, most of it not with merinos, but certainly there's been a lot of work that's looked at that, and I would have to say from the studies that I looked at, there was overwhelming evidence to suggest that if nutrition is well catered for, and that ewes are not stunted and that they grow out appropriately for their second joining, don't expect any negative impacts on their productivity. So, yeah, I think unless we see further evidence to the contrary, expect similar performance.
Great, thanks, James. Okay, James, well, that's the last of the questions. We haven't got any more coming through there, so we might wrap it up with that.
Thanks, David.
No worries.
Very good.
Thanks for taking your time and staying up with us so late to answer all these questions. No doubt you'll sleep well tonight after 45 minutes of interrogation. And
I reckon I might.
So, look, with that, I'm going to thanks, James, and on behalf of Making More from Sheep, thank you everyone for sticking up with us tonight and answering such good questions. I hope that we've done the best we can in answering them. Now, don't forget that you're always welcome to contact James directly or via us, the New South Wales State Coordinators of the Making More from Sheep program. Don't forget next week's webinar at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time. It's going to be with Associate Professor Bruce Allworth on ewe health and reproduction, the diseases and non-nutritional factors affecting it. Don't forget to put down some comments in the post-webinar survey, and yeah, we're looking forward to growing our numbers and getting more people online for some more great conversations as we progress this Making More from Sheep summer webinar series. So thanks, James, on behalf of the Making More from Sheep program and MLA for contributing, and AWI, and thank you very much to the audience, and we'll call that a night. Cheerio.